The air inside the clock tower vibrated with a low, bone-chilling hum that rattled the teeth. Mei and Lin stood before the massive, cracked clock face, their boots sliding on the uneven stone. Above them, the gears groaned like dying beasts, metal grinding against metal in a rhythmic, agonizing shriek. The central eye, wide and bloodshot, pulsed with a frantic, blinding light that swept across the room. Debris rained from the ceiling, small stones clattering against the floorboards. Without warning, the floor buckled. Mei lunged forward, catching the edge of a heavy beam to keep her balance. Dust choked the air, thick and gray. Lin stumbled, her hands grasping at the air as the structure groaned in protest. The tower was tearing itself apart. The hum grew into a roar, drowning out the sound of their own breathing. The clock was the only thing left standing. Lin gripped her trembling hands, her knuckles white, her voice barely audible over the relentless roar of the collapsing structure. "If we shatter this, what happens to us?" she shouted, her eyes darting toward the swirling vortex behind the glass. Mei stared into the light, her jaw set, her expression unyielding. "The timeline resets, Lin. The curse ends, but we will be erased from existence." A heavy silence fell between them, punctuated only by the sound of stone grinding against stone. Lin wiped tears from her face, her shoulders shaking as the reality took hold. "It is all my fault. I am the one who triggered this." Mei reached out, gripping Lin's hand firmly, her fingers locking in place with a strength that defied the shaking floor. "We both made our choices. Perfection is a lie, but we must own the consequences." The debris continued to rain down, but the panic in Lin's gaze began to fade, replaced by a grim, steady focus. They stood anchored in the center of the destruction, two figures against the inevitable end. The silence of their resolve lasted only a heartbeat. From the dark corners of the room, the shadows detached themselves, rising like ink spilled into water. They did not walk. They flowed, their forms jagged and sharp, coalescing into shapes with obsidian claws that scraped against the stone floor. Mei and Lin backed away, but the room itself was failing. The walls began to dissolve, the solid stone turning into long, flickering streaks of gray light. Every step they took met only empty air where the floor had been. The shadows lunged, closing the distance with unnatural speed. Mei pivoted, her eyes scanning the perimeter, but there was no exit. The tower was shedding its reality, leaving them stranded on a shrinking island of debris. The shadows circled, their movements erratic and hungry, forcing the two women into a tight, desperate corner against the base of the clock. The air grew cold, smelling of ozone and ancient dust. The light from the central gear flickered, casting long, distorted silhouettes. The shadows reared back, ready to strike. Mei looked at the clock, then at Lin. The tower shuddered one last time, the floor beneath them giving way entirely. Mei looked at the clock, then at Lin. "Are you ready?" Lin squeezed back, her grip tightening until her knuckles ached. "I am with you." They did not wait for the shadows to strike. With a guttural shout, they launched themselves from the crumbling ledge, their combined weight slamming into the central gear. The impact jarred their bones, but they did not release their hold. They drove their shoulders into the brass housing, pushing against the frantic, rhythmic pulse of the mechanism. The metal shrieked, a high-pitched, agonizing sound of grinding teeth that vibrated through their very marrow. The mainspring resisted, bowing outward under the pressure, its tension fighting back with the force of a coiled storm. They dug their boots into the shifting debris, straining every muscle, pouring their final reserves of strength into the mechanism. The gear groaned, buckled, and finally gave way. With one last, desperate shove, they forced the mainspring to snap. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a glass jar. A blinding white flash erupted from the core, instantly consuming the room, the lunging shadows, and the tower itself. The world was stripped of color, form, and sound, reduced to a single searing point of light that expanded until it swallowed everything. The roar of the collapse vanished, replaced by an absolute, terrifying silence. The silence held. Then, the rhythmic tapping of rain returned to the pavement. The clock tower was gone, replaced by a vacant lot, overgrown with weeds. A girl walked past the site, her pace steady, her mind fixed on the day ahead. She reached into her pocket for her keys, but her fingers brushed against something sharp and cold. She pulled it out. It was a jagged, obsidian-like fragment of metal, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic light that matched the beat of a dying heart. She stopped walking. The rain continued to fall, but she did not move. The fragment hummed against her palm, vibrating with an ancient, restless energy. She looked at the empty lot, then back at the object in her hand. The ticking grew louder. The curse had not ended. It had simply found a new place to wait. The next victim was already walking among us.